Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so just like last month, we're going to ask everyone to stay muted. And then if you have questions, we're going to ask you to put them in the chat so I can call on you, because when too many people have their microphones open at the same time, we get feedback. So check your microphone, make sure that you're muted. You can turn your video on and off. If you get a yellow, I'm going to turn my video on so you can kind of see. If you get like a yellow triangle, that is telling you that your connection is weak, the first thing that you'd want to do is turn your video off. Or if your video freezes, the first thing to try is turning your video off, and that reduces the connection issues. So, and can everyone see the chat? In the bottom middle of your screen, you have the buttons that you can click to mute, to stop your video, to either open the participants to see who is with us, or the next button right next to it is like a thought bubble. That's the chat. So if you open the chat, then you can respond. Like Trent has put in there that his microphone is acting weird. Okay, thank you, Trent. We won't ignore you either. So if you have a question, put it in there. And otherwise, Karen can just call on people, and we're going to follow the agenda for the day. So does anybody have any questions about the technology? Great. Okay, Karen, I think you're good to go.
Okay, and this meeting is being recorded. So, so on introductions, I don't know that we can just see everybody that's here on the list on the right. Is there anybody, Brian, is there anybody you need to know their name?
I don't think so. I've been trying to I've been keeping an eye on it and adding everybody's name to the roll that I see.
Okay.
Yeah, both Michelles are here. Perfect. That's the only thing I was worried about.
Person that comes up as a phone number right now. Oh, but now she fixed it. So now it's her name. So now we don't have any. So we're good.
Okay. So we have somebody that's speaking for the in the public comment today. So we'll do them after we do the community organization. So is Michelle or Katie here?
Good morning.
Disability Law Center.
Yes, good morning, Katie. I'm here. Michelle is still on maternity leave. So I will just do a really brief update. I don't have a lot to update on after our last meeting. I will just again highlight, and it was in the minutes, our COVID-19 resources webpage. So disabilitylawcenter.org/COVID-19. If anyone has questions about resources or rights, those kinds of things during this time, that would be the place to go. And we just continue to work with our clients on any difficulties they're experiencing right now. So
thanks. Okay, Division of Child and Family Services, Aubrey. It doesn't look like Aubrey's on here.
Yeah, I don't think I saw him on the list.
Okay. Okay, then Juvenile Justice Services, Michelle Sanchez.
Good morning, everybody. I don't have any updates from last time when we met, so.
Okay, thanks. Part C, Early Intervention, Teresa Davenport.
Hi, everyone. I don't have much from the Part C side, but for early childhood, ages 3 to 5, the early childhood early learning standards were approved by full board beginning of May, a couple weeks ago. So now we're starting the process of rolling those out across the state. So preschool standards have been approved, and for Part C, we're still trying to figure out how to do that transition between Part C and Part B. So the age 3 finishing early intervention services toddler services moving to preschool services. So that's been a struggle on both the Part C and the Part B side, figuring out how to do this with the soft closure and COVID. So working on that, hoping to get some more information soon from OSEP on some support of how to do that. So that's the big issue right now in the Part C world, is providing services and working on that transition to preschool.
Okay, thanks. Folk Rehab, Amy Langoni. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. I don't have too many updates from last time, except we are starting phased reopenings of our offices, so that's exciting. We also have our bidders meeting for our new RFGA, or some people know it as an RFP for pre-op services. So that's going to be held tomorrow, and then applications are due on June 12th, and then we'll have new services for students with disabilities starting in September. So we're really excited about it, and we've had some interest from LEAs, which is great. So hopefully some of them attend our bidders meeting tomorrow. That's about it. That's me for us.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and I'm just going to give a quick update about PTA. They canceled their state convention and they're doing training online, and anybody can take the training. It's in a lot of them is different officers' jobs and things like that. They have one on I think writing grants, one on avoiding scams, email scams, and things like that. Next month, I'm going to be teaching one on how to make your PTA and your school more inclusive, and how to use a special needs specialist on your PTA board. And I believe that is on the 24th. It's a Wednesday. If you're interested in those, you can go to the Utah PTA website. That's utahpta.org, and go to where it says PTA University, and they have a list of classes that they have recorded. You can also join them live on their, they call them Workshop Wednesdays. And then if you do it live, you can ask questions, but they will have the list on there. You do have to sign in, so they have it a little more protected, but they don't share your information with anybody. You just sign in your name and password, and you can watch him. Okay, we had Amanda B.
I think you skipped Amy Hurst and the Parent Center.
Oh, did I do that? Okay, I should wear my glasses more. Yeah, Amy Hurst, Parent Center. Sorry about that, Amy.
No, you're okay. Good morning. We continue to just move rapidly to online with different trainings and things that we were bringing to people so that we can continue with our services. We just had our Associate Director, Gina Money, retire. She's retiring at the end of May, and Esperanza Reyes will be our Associate Director. So we're wishing Gina well. It was 30 years of service with her. She's wonderful. And Esperanza is wonderful. We're excited for her too. And then we do have our Transition University coming up online on June 10th, and it goes for 6 weeks, and people can do the classes that fit their needs and don't have to do them all, but can do them all. It's our most extensive transition to adult life program we've ever done. Really digs into employment, daily life, so many things, education. So we're excited for that. And we're going to do that in Zoom for now, and hopefully we'll be able to take it out to the communities. And then I have notes in a couple places. We are doing parent support groups in English and Spanish, where parents can just come in and troubleshoot what's going on, and this crisis kind of teaching that we're still in. It's not quite being in school, and it's not it's kind of in between, and so we're doing that in English and Spanish, and people are joining and talking there. And then the parent concerns we're hearing that we'd kind of like the committee to know about is understanding the possibility of compensatory services due to the impact of the soft closures. And Leah and Nate did a very good Facebook Live that was really helpful with that. I continue to send that to parents that have those questions, as well as others. And then the other concern we're hearing is accommodating and supporting students when we open in the fall, some of those more medically fragile, medically complex kids, making sure they have a placement. And it might be something this committee wants to look at, giving a little bit of advice on. We could wait and see kind of what happens, or, it might be something we could consider. And then understanding what's available during the summertime for summer programs, as far as ESY, or we have a lot of parents asking if they can get compensatory services over the summer, instead of waiting for the fall. So those are the things we're hearing. We're also hearing a lot of transition questions, transition to adult life, because there's a lot going on in that time period, and COVID has disrupted quite a bit of that. So that's the Utah Parent Center update.
Thanks. Okay, did I get everybody else, Leah? Sorry about that.
Yep.
Okay, we had Amanda B from the Utah Food Allergy Network wanted to give some public comment.
Check your mics and make sure that they are muted.
Okay. Okay, something just happened to my screen there. That's weird. Okay.
So Amanda B, are you able to talk?
I'm not, is she on there? Are you seeing her?
No, I don't see, I just see Amanda Longwell. I don't think she's on, Karen.
Yeah, and I just texted her. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't think she's on.
Okay. Well, my screen just went weird, so I can't see who's.
Okay, well, so the next thing on our agenda is the overview of LEA Continuum of Behavior Supports from our Granite friends, Noelle Converse and Judy Peterson. Do you want to have them begin now?
Yeah. Is that, how long is that? That's a 30-minute one. Can we stop if Amanda signs on, or is that, would that be too disjointed?
Has she responded to your text?
Let me check. She hasn't. So maybe if she responds, I'll say, okay, can you do it at like 10 or when we finish the overview? Is that reasonable? Okay, let's do that then. Let's go to Noelle and Judy for the overview of the LEA Continuum of Behavior Supports.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Noelle Converse. I'm actually the Curriculum and Instruction Director in Granite School District now, but the former Special Education Director. And with Judy.
Yeah, I'm Judy Peterson. I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yep, both of you were good.
I've also put a link to the presentation in the chat so that you can follow along that way, in addition to us presenting. That way you can look at it or keep it for later or what have you.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start. I need to share my screen with you all. So I'll do that now. It says it's working on it. Okay, there we go. And if I share my entire screen, then it should go to what I want to show you.
So we don't see it yet.
Well, it's working on it.
It's thinking.
Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen?
I saw
Okay, can you see the screen?
yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay, whoops, I'm gonna cancel that, and I'm just gonna go to present mode. And Noelle, let's see. Okay, well, we're really excited for this opportunity. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Over the last 5-6 years, we have had amazing support from our district leadership for all things related to behavior. The superintendent organized a task force a few years back, just with a variety of people on the task force to really hone in on what our behavior needs are in the district, where we need to go in terms of supporting behavior across the continuum, from our most needy students on one end to our most needy students on the other end. Our objectives today are to share a little bit of that information with you. Our classroom behavior supports, social emotional supports, thinking functionally about behavior and what we've done there, and then assessing intensive and individualized district supports. I'm most excited to share the pyramid slide. Can all of you see that? Pyramid slide.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. So this has been a work in progress. Um, and as the Director of College and Career Readiness, it's important to know that in my under my supervision, there are our school social workers, school counselors, our comprehensive counseling program K-12 in Granite School District. Then we have collaborative work in the district with curriculum instruction department, special education, educational equity, our school accountability leaders, and all others. So as we have built a system of behavior supports in Granite School District, we've had a variety of folks as part of the development and the discussion and board approval and everything moving forward. So as you look at the green section in Tier 1, we are probably the one and only district in Utah that is implementing school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, K-12. We've had a couple of little grants along the way to help us do that, but we're very, very proud of the progress we've made, especially in our secondary schools, establishing expectations, teaching expectations, providing reinforcements for the expectations, and then reteaching when necessary. The other piece that we've been able to use to help move our behavior supports forward is that every month we have what we call the Granite Way Professional Learning. The first Wednesday of every month, we join all of our administrators together. We train on a variety of topics related to school improvement for academics and behavior. And this has been a nice platform from which we can train all of our admin on behavior supports. And then they, in turn, take the presentation for the month back to their local school to share with their faculty, their staff. So it's just created a nice little system of providing professional learning at all levels of our work. In our prevention mode for behavior supports, we also have our suicide prevention. We have implemented a K-12 social and emotional learning curriculum. We're using Mind Up for that at the K-8 level, and for our junior high and high school students, we have a self-created social and emotional learning skill of the month that we roll out over a 3 to 4 year rotation to all of our secondary students in their advisory class or through their health classes and or through school-wide initiatives. We've done a lot of work on developing school behavior and safety plans. We've purchased Ed Handbook for use in tracking incidents of behavior and other supports. Let me see, I'm going to go back. And then you can see what we do at Tier 2. Probably the most exciting part of what we're doing with Tier 2 is we have a partnership with the University of Utah through their the College of Education, the Department of Educational Psychology, and we've created a partnership team called BURST. You'll see that kind of in the middle of the yellow area of the pyramid, and BURST stands for Behavior Response Support Team. We have partnered with the university where they have graduate and doctoral students assigned to identified schools in our district to work with some of our high-profile behaviors, gen ed behaviors, in helping teachers identify really good strategies to support the behavior expectations for each of those individual schools. That starts out with a training called Thinking Functionally About Behavior, and it's proven to be a really good model. We started out with a handful of schools, and now we're implementing that in 17 of our elementary schools. In addition to that, the partnership has provided an amazing, looks like I've got some echo. There, we're back, good. Some modules, probably 15 modules on behavior, different aspects of behavior that our teachers and our paraprofessionals have been able to utilize, especially during this distance learning school dismissal time period, to really focus in on some quick strategies, quick approaches to behavior. The other piece is that our district leadership has provided funding for a 29-hour-a-week behavioral health assistant in each of our schools, K-12, to support students who require additional assistance for checking in, checking out, and that sort of thing. And then just this year, with the support of the mental health grant, we've been able to provide, we've actually hired 2 amazing gen ed behavioral specialists, and you'll hear a little bit more about them in a few minutes. And then finally, at the intensive effort on the top of the pyramid, we have our individualized student behavior supports through our special education behavior specialists and our process for referring and discussing students who require additional supports and help. So any questions on that slide? I know that was kind of a hop around overview. Any questions? And or Noelle, would you like to weigh in on that slide?
Nope, I think that's a good introduction.
Okay, very good. All right, moving on to the next slide then. We have the supports that we're providing at the classroom level in a little bit more detail. And I need to let you know too that during the school dismissal time period, we've been able to provide the same kinds of supports virtually in a different way, but still providing the support virtually for our students as we have in our brick and mortar buildings. And that's been kind of exciting to watch our social workers, our psychologists, our counselors, our PBIS coaches. The work goes on. It looks a little different, feels a little different, but it has really been a great opportunity for us to sharpen our skills, sharpen our focus, and meet the needs of kids. So at the tier 1 level, in addition to what you saw in our triangle, I just want to highlight our mindfulness curriculum. The Mind Up curriculum that we use there in our K-8 programs is from Scholastic. It was actually developed by Goldie Hawn, of all people. We were able to do training for all of our psychs and social workers on the Mind Up curriculum, and they actually deliver the curriculum to our students in collaborative classroom work throughout each of our elementary schools. That has been amazing. The other piece that we've added this year to provide supports at the tier 1 level, we decided to do a student self-care fair. We had our first one in January at Olympus High School. We had 200 or so families join us at the self-care fair. We had agencies represented there, as well as our school district professionals in a table format. We had opportunities for kids and their families to go through this fair table by table, learn about being more mindful, practicing some mindful activities by painting, by coloring, we had yoga, we had a mindful class, and in addition to that, we added in to that self-care fair the critical topics that need to be addressed by each of the school districts during the course of the year related to suicide prevention, drug and alcohol use, child abuse protection, and so on. So we had classes running concurrently with the fair. That was amazing. The other piece you can see here is our BURST partnership, and I think that's all I'll say there. I wanted to highlight a little bit of what we're doing with BURST. And Noelle, if I lost the Twitter feed, but for you good people out there in the cyber world, if you could write down the following tag, it's at GSD_BURST, and you can follow what we've been able to do to promote appropriate behavior and through this distance learning school dismissal time period. Every day, our BURST partnership group puts out little mini videos on different behavior topics to support kids and parents and families, specifically during the school dismissal time. Noelle, did you find those?
I just added it to the chat.
Okay, excellent. So then you can go to the chat and actually watch those. They're so cute. And they're done in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And I believe there's one other language I can't remember, but just really cute, fun, exciting 30 to 45-second videos on behavior supports.
And I would just add they're geared towards the parents. So they make them very simple so that parents can just apply a really quick behavior strategy when they're doing distance teaching in their homes.
The other piece that is a highlight for us in Tier 1 is being able to provide some supports for our teacher with a quick classroom management self-assessment. We call this the CSI. And it's just a really good starting point with teachers when they identify to our coaches, our behavior specialists, our social workers and counselors, psychologists. Whenever there's, an issue of behavior, one of the basic areas to address is just, what is the teacher's classroom management like? So this is a quick little self-assessment that we use as we work with teachers to help them understand if they have some of the basics in place. The other piece I mentioned previously was the effort we're giving to train teachers on just thinking functionally about behavior and knowing that behavior happens mainly because kids want to get something or they want to get out of something. And when we have done our teaching functionally about behavior presentations in our schools, it's allowing our teachers to look at the students differently, to look at their behavior differently, to think about antecedents or presenting situations and circumstances, trauma, other kinds of things that might trigger the behavior. What are the triggers? Where does it start? Why is it starting? And looking at really that function. Is the student wanting something or not wanting something? Trying to get something or trying to get out of something? And that's been a huge benefit of our behavior initiative over the last 5 to 6 years, and the majority of our elementary schools and secondary schools have actually had specific staff training on thinking functionally about behavior. And the slide that just explains what I just talked to you about. Okay, the next piece is social and emotional learning. That is really a top priority, especially right now. Not to discount the current situation, but wow, meeting the social and emotional needs of kids across the district, individually in small groups and classrooms, has been a huge challenge. So we've been trying out a couple different things. As I mentioned, we do our Mind Up curriculum, which is basically helping our students to be able to function higher levels socially and emotionally. We have also developed a partnership with Valley Behavioral Health to provide, this is a pilot that we're trying in one of our elementary schools, to have a Valley Behavioral Health therapist on campus with some behavior support technicians to actually provide some tier 2 intervention in a classroom. And we'll be looking at our data and providing an opportunity to assess where we've been with that once we've got the school year wrapped up on Friday. But we were able to get this up and running just before the school dismissal period. But the therapists that we've hired, plus the behavior support technicians, have been able to help parents with interventions and supports for their kids during this distance learning time. The other piece that we've added in with social and emotional learning, with the support of our one of our key social workers in the district, we've organized a Granite Mental Health Consortium where once a month we bring together all of the mental health agencies out and about in Salt Lake County, those serving Granite District kids, to develop, well, first off, to understand what services and things they're providing, to share with them what supports we're providing in our schools for students, and then coming together on collaborating over kids, collaborating over circumstances and situations. This group has become our go-to group for our student self-care fairs as well as our teacher self-care fairs. And it's just been an amazing opportunity to problem solve within the community around social and emotional learning. Noelle, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Okay, so in terms of our tiered response, we really work together across all of the tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And the addition of the general education supports that we've added in the last couple years through accessing the mental health grant that the legislature funded has really kind of bolstered our ability to provide a multi-tiered support system that doesn't fall primarily on the shoulders of Tier 3. So we feel like we've really invested in Tier 1 and Tier 2 to an extent that it's not just special education kind of running the behavior for the district anymore. And there was a time when it felt like that. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about Tier 3, and Judy, you can move it on to the next slide. But Tier 3 and our student support process. So in the past, Tier 3 has really felt like special education, and that's what you get at Tier 3. What has changed because of our ability to bolster Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports is now Tier 3, we're really able to diversify what we provide at Tier 3. And so our student support process looks different because of that. What you'll see, and you can kind of see the colors that we have in place, but you'll see that at the top of that display, when a parent or a teacher has a concern about behavior, we have a problem-solving process that you see represented by the circle that has data in the middle with the arrows going around. And that's really about collecting and analyzing data at every level, starting with teacher and parent, working together at the Tier 1 level, regardless of whether or not a student has a disability, and really working to figure out what the function of the behavior is, as well as what needs and supports a student may have, both academic and behaviorally, in order to best support them. And then you'll see as you move down through Tier 1, down the chart there, you'll see that we have grade level teams that then also review this data. And from there, it goes to a school level team that looks at the data and involves the parents and talks about what we might be able to do. And that's where you saw our gen ed behavior specialists getting involved, our coaches getting involved, our psychs and social workers getting involved. And then finally, when things become intensive and things have not worked at lower levels, that's finally when we start to look at Tier 3. So you can move on to the next slide, Judy.
Okay, hopefully it will work. Yeah, I don't know what's happened. There we go.
Okay, so our gen ed at Tier 3 is really about now that we have gen ed behavior specialists and additional mental health support providers. It's really about looking at a student's individualized needs, not just making a referral for special education, because we know all of us, and I know that many of you in the agencies you work for, you're very aware of this, that behavior needs don't necessarily mean that a student has a disability. Many times they do, and we need to pursue qualification quickly, but sometimes they don't. And so our goal is to really find the root cause and figure out what specific individualized supports a student needs before we make those very life-changing decisions when that's appropriate. And so our district behavior specialists have really been instrumental in helping us to do that. Keep going, Judy. So this really shows you the tiered response that we have at Tier 3 level. And so there's a Tier 1 support, a Tier 2 support, and a Tier 3 support. So once the gen ed behavior specialists have basically tried what they could try with the school teams at their level, and they see that things are not progressing in a way that makes sense, and the team determines that a student may be a student with a disability, or a parent has a request for a student to be qualified or referred for disability, and they're determined eligible, then special education takes over. And in special education, there's also a tiered response. Our goal with a tiered response in terms of special education is to keep students in the most inclusive environments possible, so that there is as little disruption in terms of LRE as we can manage and still meet the needs of the student. So you'll see just a real quick overview of our the way we do that. And so it's starting with the school coordinators, it's then specializing to determine what the specific needs of the student might be, and then finally providing intensive services. And we have a behavior support team at the tier 3 level in special education that is comprised of behavior specialists, of BCBAs, of LCSWs, and school psychologists who support a student case and then help the IEP team and help the school team and help create a wraparound service model with outside agencies for the student. And they basically help to manage that case from the district level. And you can go ahead and keep going. So in special education, we have the three focus are social emotional learning, as is at every tier, and then applied behavior analysis and inclusive education. We have multiple BCBA certified staff on the special education team, as well as a school psychologist and social worker assigned to every school, and then multiple partnerships with outside behavior supports. So I want to talk just a little bit about those outside behavior supports and our partnerships that we have going, because they're quite diverse. We have, in addition to the U and our partnerships at Tier 1 and Tier 2, our partnerships at Tier 3 have been through USU. And so we've worked very specifically with the ASSERT program and Dr. Tom Higbee, as well as ABA consultation. And that started with Dr. Tyra Banks, who led out the Utah Behavior Supports, I think it was committee or consultation group through USU, and they focused on ABA as well. So the model that you just saw presented for special education and our behavior supports is based on the creation with both Tom and Tyra of a behavior consultation model, so that it's very systematic. And then we've also shared that model with neighboring districts as well. So we have that very well embedded in our district, to the extent that we have specific ABA focused classrooms as well as ASSERT classrooms. And then we have ABA support through the behavior team in every school based on the needs, and a staff of BCBAs, and then what we call behavior support technicians, a district-wide team of behavior support technicians who are highly trained paras who receive RBT training, and they go out and support kids in the school. And I have a question in the chat, so let me read this. It asks, would you describe the data collected at the various levels, how the data are collected, and how short-term outcomes are identified and progress evaluated? Great. So if you go back, Judy, just a couple slides to the steps. So if you look at any one of these, you can see basically what we do is we collect functional behavior data. So we do brief functional behavior assessments, and then we do more expansive functional analyses, as well as observations, parent interviews, school interviews, and we collect all of that data using various, progress monitoring charts. And I could share you more specifically, we took out of this presentation the specific data collection tools that we use when we train our staff. But they're the ABC, antecedent behavior consequence documents, as well as tally components, as well as observation protocols. And then we have a weekly team meeting. It's called the behavior team meeting. It's a Friday meeting where we have both gen ed behavior specialists and special ed behavior specialists come together to review that information. They reach out to the school teams, they reach out to the parents, and they then revise their recommendations, and then they present those recommendations as options for IEP teams to use at their level. Does that help, Kat? Hopefully. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yes, sure. And so, yeah, so the BSTs that I was describing, the behavior support technicians, we have about 25 that are dedicated to special education, and then we have several that are dedicated to gen ed. And we train them in everything that our behavior specialists are trained on, and they do most of the data collection. So our behavior specialists, our LCSWs, and our BCBAs on the team, they train the BSTs to collect the data. And Kat is asking, are there near-peer supports involving students supporting students? So do we use peers as models? Absolutely, yeah. So we absolutely, where we can, employ peer modeling in our inclusive settings. So our goal with our entire tiered system is to keep our LRE as healthy as we can. So to keep as many kids accessing gen ed as they can. So what happens is we'll have the techs, yes, the techs or paras, and we'll have the techs go into the gen ed classroom with our students who have those needs, and they will prompt, but they'll kind of hang back, and they'll encourage the peer-to-peer communication and the more natural supports. And then they'll work a little with the teacher after and before the class to remind them of the goals of the student and what we're working on, and get some input, feedback to make some changes. We don't do explicit training with peers, but we do more of what we try to do with our BSTs and our supports is we try to make sure that the BSTs, when we train them, understand how to make a student feel included by presenting their supports to multiple kids at the same time. So even if it's a student who is a model student, the BST will go in and talk with a group of students versus just be the tag on to one student. They'll work with the group around them and kind of go over, okay, I guess the task right now is this. What are the norms for this task? What are we going to do? And then the models kind of naturally emerge that way. But unless it's something we're doing within the IEP team, we haven't done any specific training with the peers on their own, although that's a great strategy as well. A few other partnerships I want to talk about in addition to our behavior team, which is really the crux of what we do for behavior and special education, are our Valley Behavioral Health Partnerships. Our Valley Behavioral Health Partnership goes way back to CBTU, any of you that have known our child behavior therapy unit at Robert Frost Elementary, which is our day treatment, basically, support in Granite School District for elementary students who have the most intensive needs in special education. In addition to that, we also have monthly student staffings. So regardless of whether or not a student is in CBTU or whether they are temporarily in Valley Behavioral, one of their outpatient day treatment sessions, or if they're one of the students receiving outpatient therapy, once we have permission, we do monthly student staffings with the Valley Behavioral Health staff to make sure that we're doing what's we are supposed to do on our end, and they're doing what they're doing on their end to support the parents and provide that wraparound service. So we've found that the most important way to manage our efficacy and our efficiency with students who have mental health needs is to make sure we're all on the same page. And the only way we can do that is through the Granite Mental Health Consortium and our staffings. And then just in addition, we've started the GAP program, which the mental health grant has really allowed us to take off. And that is for exigent circumstances. So circumstances where students have exhausted some of the ability to be in the gen ed setting temporarily, or because they really don't want, they don't feel supported in a regular classroom. Both kids in gen ed and in special ed, we have a GAP program that is extremely intensive and has multiple LCSWs as well as BSTs, special ed and gen ed teachers. And then we have counselor support, and we work with prevention, the prevention department side by side to make sure our kids who might end up in juvenile justice, or they've come out of juvenile justice, are not just getting in trouble, not getting arrested in school. And that is more about circumstances where there's been criminal history. And so that's still a temporary program, but it's our alternative to losing the kids where in the past we've seen kids kind of drift away or end up in another system program. This is our way of making sure we hold on to our kids and that they're still getting their education. And then lastly, we've duplicated our CBTU support through the mental health grant by having partnerships with behavioral health in our secondary SEL classrooms by contracting with them. So that is like, we went a little over our time, but that in a nutshell is a really, really brief overview of the 3 tiers of the supports that we have with behavior. If you have any questions.
Noelle, I have a quick question about your behavior support technicians, because you said they got really intense training. So give me kind of, maybe if you can, the collective, how many hours would you say you spend? And is that training an ongoing thing? Do they get, okay, so like, how many hours are they in training before they actually then enter the classroom?
Yeah, that's great. So when they first start, they have about a week's worth of intensive training, and they also shadow. So they shadow the existing behavior, the BCBAs and BSTs, and they don't do anything on their own. So through USU and our ABA consultation over the last 6 years, we refined the model of how we train those behavior support technicians, because they really are the most important piece, because they're doing it day to day. And so if they're doing it incorrectly, or they're modeling it incorrectly for others at the school level, that can be really problematic. So they have at least one monthly training and kind of what we call a firm up skills practice session at the district level, where we review the basic pieces and then do kind of a coaching session with them. They also all have to get their RBT training. So we pay for that for them. And then we also compensate them once they have it. So they get a lane change. So we've been able to keep these individuals on because we're paying them what they're worth, basically. And then we're training them with the RBT pieces. Yeah. And so I think that there are silver linings to everything. And one silver lining with the distance learning is we didn't let any of our hourly people go at all across the district. Instead, what we did was provide them intensive training through both RBT and also our burst. What Judy didn't talk about with our burst program is we have a whole set of training modules that are assigned to that. And before distance learning, we didn't have the time to train all of our paras because they're always in the classroom. And so this opportunity has given us the chance to really ramp up our training temporarily with them so that they're ready to go once we're back in the classroom.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. This has been kind of fun. We panicked a little bit before that, and then there was another. Yes, they are under the BCBA license, and they provide the supervision. So there's the answer to that. Okay, well, thank you. Have a great meeting.
Thank you too for coming. We appreciate your presentation.
And then you've got the links to our presentation, and then also the link for the Burst Facebook page.
Right.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I thought I pretty much knew your program, and there were things that I didn't recognize that you were doing. So, wow, thank you so much.
Sure, and I just want to put a plug in. The mental health grant has been instrumental in kind of pushing this forward for us.
Awesome.
Very good. Hey, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We have Amanda B on. Amanda, are you still there? I think you're muted. So I'm going to give Amanda B a couple of minutes for she has a public comment she'd like to make. You're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda B, and I'm the president of Utah Food Allergy Network. And I wanted to talk to you guys for a minute about the CDC guidelines that came out regarding school starting in the fall in the midst of COVID-19. I'm the mother of a child with food allergies as well. I have a daughter who is 8 years old who has severe food allergies and also has a 504 plan accommodating her food allergies at school. So prohibiting food in the classroom of food allergic children is a basic and essential disability accommodation. Many children with food allergies have a 504 plan, and often in that 504 plan, they have accommodations where either their specific allergen is prohibited from entering the classroom, or many are just moving to a fully food-free classroom for their safety. I wanted to go over, because a lot of people don't know a lot of information about food allergies, so I wanted to go over a little bit of information and some facts, if that's okay. There are 32 million Americans with food allergies, and of that, 6 million are children. That comes out to about 1 in 13 children in American classrooms have food allergies, so an estimated 2 in every classroom. Of those children, there's been bullying reported at 70%. 70% of food allergic children have been bullied. Some of them have been bullied to the point that they have had their allergens thrown at them. They've gone into anaphylaxis. A few have died. 90% of food allergic children suffer from anxiety. 70% report suffering from panic attacks. 15% of food allergic children have had a reaction requiring epinephrine at school. And 20 to 25% of allergic reactions that happen at school happen to children who haven't yet been diagnosed with a food allergy. And then, the worst thing is most fatal food reactions happen outside of the home. And the majority of the places that children spend the majority of their time outside of home is usually at school. So it is a very big concern. I also want to talk about the social and emotional impact because, as I said, so many children suffer bullying, they suffer anxiety. When you take a child with food allergies and you put them in a lunchroom to feed them, they are on high alert. They have to be aware of everything that they touch. They have to be aware of whether or not somebody's sitting next to them and will possibly spill food on them. They have to make sure they don't eat their allergen. They're on high alert, right? But on average, lunch lasts about, what, 20 minutes? To have their allergen in their classroom, which is what the CDC guidelines are suggesting, that in order to eliminate the amount of time children spend in large groups, they would eat their breakfast or lunch in the classroom. That means that food allergic children, 2 kids in every classroom, are going to have to be on very high alert in order to keep themselves safe. And that environment is not conducive to learning. And we at UFAN, Utah Food Allergy Network, and all of our members are very, very concerned about the coming school year. I also want to talk to you about, sorry about that. I've got my notes, so please excuse me. So as I said, many children in school with food allergies have a 504 plan. And like I said, many of them are already being prohibited from bringing food into the classroom. And I just want everyone to keep that in mind as they move forward into making plans for the fall, because those that have existing 504 plans, food allergies are a disability recognized by the ADA because they limit major life functions such as breathing and eating. And so in order to keep these food allergic children safe and able to attend school, we cannot, for their physical safety and their emotional safety, we cannot leave that essential part of planning for next school year out of the conversation. And I know that these times are unprecedented. I know that everyone is scrambling, trying to do the very best that they can to accommodate the students, accommodate the teachers and everyone else. But we have to look at different options for kids with food allergies in the classroom as far as feeding them, whether that be an alternative like an empty classroom or staggering lunch times. It's just something that's going to have to come up. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you, let's see, am I muted? Can you give me or send us a website or a place where we could look for reference that would talk about some of those things and maybe give some suggestions for what can be done?
Yeah, I absolutely can. FACT actually sent a letter to the CDC bringing up many of these concerns, and I'm happy to forward that letter to you. Their lawyer created it. It says Amanda has a question.
Amanda, are you muted? I'm not hearing you.
You guys are going to have to give me a second. I'm on the call with Corey's medical doctor, so I'm juggling 2 things at once.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me do this really quick. I need like a minute.
Okay. So, Leah, how does, food allergy has accommodations as a 504 plan, but it's not listed as something you'd have an IEP for, is that right?
Likely not, no. So technically, USEAM doesn't have any purview to make recommendations related to 504 plans, only related to the special education and the IEP process.
Oh, okay. And the IEP that affects their ability to learn. They have to have specialized teaching or things like that.
Requires specially designed instruction and related services, yes.
Okay. So is there a better place that someone with food allergies, that those 504 plans would fall?
Well, as far as the State Board of Education, Holly Bell is the specialist responsible for 504 plans.
Okay. Okay. It looks like Amanda is ready. Amanda, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So everything that was expressed, absolutely good. I've got some friends that their kids have some super sensitive like allergies and things that they've almost died. As a parent with a child that has the need to have food throughout her day as per accommodation, I guess my comment is slash question is we've got to figure out a balance to it, because with my daughter, if she wasn't allowed to have her snacks to help her get her food intake that she needs, then she's declining in her attention and her energy and all these other things. And then if she's pulled out of the classroom, she's losing her access to that instruction. So it's one of those like kind of putting into this conversation how we can balance both so we're not negatively impacting one as we're trying to make it work only for the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know the perfect answer to that. It's just something that definitely needs to be thought about, because it would be, it's detrimental to my daughter's day to have that flexibility, or she disengages because she does not have the nutrients she needs. Does that make sense?
No, that does. And actually, my daughter's classroom is 100% food free because she's had 8 anaphylactic reactions in the past. She's contact reactive to milk. We recently started a medical program that requires that she have food available to her, but her classroom is still food free because she's not the only person in the classroom with allergens. So when she has to have food, she goes into a separate room and has a bite of food. So like with all things, nothing's going to be perfect. We all have to work together to accommodate. I know there are some there, and there's a range of severity, right? And there's a range of what people are able to be around. Some people are not contact reactive. Some people are reactive to particles in the proteins in the air. Just like your daughter, there's some kids that do not need a snack, and there are other kids that do have to, like type 1 diabetics and different things where they have to have food throughout the day, and taking that away is not an option. So, but there are safe ways to do things, such as stepping out of the room or having one corner of the room where she eats and then she washes hands or wipes hands before going back to her desk and touching other objects in the room. And this isn't what I'm talking about. That's a larger issue as a whole. Obviously, it's the opinion that children with food allergies across the board, when you have an estimated 2 in every classroom, that it is safer to just keep food out of the classroom, right? But what I'm talking about today is not necessarily that, because that's a much larger issue. What I'm talking about is these children's ability to even attend school next year, because to have food in their classroom all day. I know that there are sometimes peanut-free schools. I know there's sometimes nut-free schools, but there are 8 top allergens, and children can be allergic to over 180 different identified foods. So to say, well, we'll just keep this classroom peanut-free, or we'll just keep this classroom nut-free, isn't a best solution. I think I don't know if it's something that like the school administrators will need to work with each of their children with food allergies, and look at their 504s and their specific needs, just like they would need to look at the specific needs of your daughter and say, well, she needs to be accommodated too, and she deserves that. But I will say that many food allergy parents are very concerned and afraid about sending their kids to school in this coming year.
I agree. I'm afraid to send my daughter because of the medical exposure, like some of the chat is.
Yeah.
Specifically the virus, not necessarily the food. So I've got comparable concern on a different avenue. So totally hear you.
So I think, Amanda, you're saying we should keep that in mind, that that's one more thing that we should be thinking about when we're looking at these kinds of things, how school's going to look in the fall, or what we have any influence over. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not like I said, this time we're all struggling, right? I'm not saying across the board, food in the classroom absolutely cannot happen. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to look at it. Like my daughter's school, for example, one of the teachers has already reached out to me and said, we have an extra classroom, I think, in our new school where, because of the severity of her reactions and her contact reactiveness, maybe that class can eat in another classroom. I'm just saying everyone's going to have to work together to think, what can we do to make this safe? Can we have an empty classroom where kids with classes with severe food allergies, stagger their lunches in there? Things like that. I'm just saying it needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. We appreciate you, Bree, coming and making us aware of that. That's some good information.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next on the agenda is the questions related to the online presentations. And Leah, do you have that list?
Yes. So all of the staff who created those presentations are here with us. So if you want to begin with the questions that were submitted for the restorative practices training, Corby and Kuhn are available to respond to the questions that Summer submitted. And then if anyone else has a question after that. The only questions we received by email related to this presentation were from Summer. So Corby or Kuhn, does one of you want to respond to those questions first?
Yes, my name is Corby East. I'm a prevention specialist at Utah State Board of Education. And so, yes, I would love to answer those 4 questions that we have about restorative practices. So the first, let me pull up the questions real quick so I can see and talk at the same time. Awesome. So the first question is about implementation of restorative practices statewide. And so I'm gonna kind of give you a brief training that the agency has done. We did a 1-day overall training 2 years ago, and it was over 300 participants statewide that did the training. Then also that same year we did 9 regional training across the whole state, and that training was a 4-hour training. Then also within that same year, later in the spring, we did a 32-hour training, and 45 individual from different LEAs across the state did that 32-hour training. But as far as implementation goes, each LEA, a few LEAs decide to take a district-wide approach to restorative practices, and they decided to focus on how restorative practices improve school culture and climate, and how it improves social emotional learning. On the other hand, we had particular schools reach out to our agency requesting training for their school staff, and so we have done training for a whole school and the whole staff, meaning teachers, janitors, lunchroom ladies. And so it varies on the implementation. And so we didn't require LEAs to implement it one way. We allowed them to either take a district wide approach, or we decide, or each school decide on how they will implement restorative practices. Because restorative practices is a continual of practices. You can focus anywhere on just focus on building relationships with individual students, with students to teacher, uh, staff to community members. But also you can go on the more of the tier 3 interventions, providing more restorative justice interventions when you bring 2 parties together to resolve a conflict. And so based off the whole continuum of restorative practices, each LEA decided to focus on one area or the whole continuum. So it varies from LEA to LEA. Any questions about that first questions? Any follow-up questions? And so question number 2.
Which, just so everyone knows, I put the questions in the chat so you can follow along with Corby.
Yep. So question number 2, how do restorative practices fit within PBIS models adapted by many LEAs? So one of the best implementation guides that I saw across the nation, it was done by Jefferson County's Public Schools District in Kentucky. They integrated PBIS, school climate, and restorative practices. And so then I can share that link, that PDF with Leah, and Leah can share it with the group. It really walks step by step on having a restorative practice team and being able to uh, adapt it with their school-wide expectations. For example, um, a school-wide expectation may be, I want to be safe in the classroom. And so how restorative practices relates to fit within that classroom expectation. For example, when the expectation is not being met by a student, a teacher could use an affective statement of saying, for example, when I see running in the classroom, it make me feel afraid. So that allowed the class to understand how their behavior is affecting the teacher emotions. And so again, affective statement is more of eliciting a statement that elicits how someone behavior is affecting another person emotion. And so that's an example that how restorative practices fit within PBIS. And the other thing with restorative practices, it focuses more on the harm that is done between two individual or the whole class versus um, a kid not meeting classroom expectation or breaking the classroom rule. And so again, I'll be able to separate the deed from the doer. And with PBIS, we set classroom expectation. We find a way to reinforce those. We model those, and using, like, for example, affective statements, again, allow to teach kids how to express their emotions, how certain behavior is making them feel unsafe. Then also with using the affective statement, it align with social emotional learning. And I don't know how familiar you are with Capsule Compasses, a framework of social emotional learning, like using the affective statement, the kid become more self-aware and they can self-manage better. And so, and also with restorative practices, you have the restorative questions or the affective questions, and that asking what happened, and things like that. What kind of do make things right? And so again, it allows the student not only to just focus on the infraction that they violated, but more focused on how to resolve and repair the harm that was done to their to the individual or to the teacher or to the school community. Any follow-up questions after that? Awesome. So I will go to question number 3. Who would be in charge of determining a student with a disability ability to participate in restorative practicing? And if they are determined to not benefit from restorative practice, what measure can be in place to prepare them with the skills to be able to access in the future? So again, restorative practice is such a big continuum. I know when people think about restorative practices, they immediately shift their mind to circles. Yes, circle is a part of restorative practices, but there are other interventions within restorative practices. So ideally, just like any other kids with a disability, the initial teacher or the school counselor or the psychologist or the social worker, they should be review the student file beforehand, consult either with the special education teacher that holds a kid file or someone on the IEP team to really get an understanding of the ability of the student, and also what type of accommodations that they can provide to be able to participate in the interventions of restorative practices. And also, I have been working with a school that their whole school is um, serving students with disability, and they found many ways to either have the prompts, the questions that are being asked in a circle is read out loud for the student, or the student are given the questions beforehand, before the circle, so they can be able to think about. Then also, kids can use pictures to be able to articulate how they are feeling um, with the interventions when you're using restorative practices. And so, ideally, it's a collaboration with the special education department, and be able to have this conversation beforehand, be proactive, and have a procedure in place beforehand, then versus being reactive. And then with any other skills, um, how to develop skills. You can have small group instructions for the students that need extra support, or one-on-one instruction either by a school counselor, school psych, or a school social worker that help the student with the skills to be able to access it in the future.
Corby, can you see Michelle's follow-up question? Would an SLP be beneficial to help students with communication disorders when applying restorative practices?
Can I ask a naive question? Can you spell out SLP? So I'll just make sure I'm on.
Speech language pathologist.
Okay, though I thought, I just want to make sure.
You're good. You're good.
Yes, I think that's a great another person that can be great at doing that. I know with my internship, I had an administrator that had a SLP background, and she was really great of helping students communicate when using restorative practices, when using the affective statements to be able to express how they feel in various situations.
Yeah, and I see that a lot across the state. It's a very common practice.
Yeah. And people use social stories. I mean, it's pretty cool how this particular site was very helpful and accommodative for the student with disability. And um,
And Trent is asking if a person harmed has a disability and appears they were targeted because of that disability, do you discuss those dynamics during the restorative practices conversations?
so that is a very tricky one. And the restorative justice people say you can conference anything. I have a mix of feeling about what should be conference in the restorative conversation, because first it needed to be you need to seek parent permission to be able to see if they want to be if they want to participate in a restorative um, conversation when it's and because this sounds like a bullying type situation, and so you need parent permission, and also this conversation need to be voluntary, not required. Um, and it's good because it can re-traumatize an individual, especially if they don't understand what they're doing and understand what can be what may can uh, re-traumatize individual. And so I'll be very mindful looking at an individual case and have a procedure, again going back to having a procedure of what your staff feel comfortable engaging in restorative practices, conversation. Uh, um, and so, and this is again, Trent, this is a more of a tier 3 intervention when you bring the two parties together. And that alone take additional 16-hour training, and this individual that facilitate this type of um, intervention, they need to be trained and being able to facilitate this type of conference. This, to me, what the question that you just asked is more of a restorative conference, and that's like a tier 3 intervention. Ideally, I mean, people think, oh, we can just get people together, and that when it can go back, but it can go bad very, very fast. Uh,
Thank you. Okay, you can move on to the next one.
yeah. Um, in an LEA, who would be tasked with providing on using restorative practice with disability? Ideally, again, in a more comprehensive implementation, um, uh, usually the student, like for example, I'm gonna use a district example. One district I work with, the student service director work with the person that is over special education, and they work together, and they provided a training, and they was very mindful of when you use restorative practice with children with disability, make sure X, Y, and Z happen. Make sure that people review the IEP. Make sure there's a plan in place for accommodation for the students. Then also too is, would this do more harm? Um, would it do more harm, or would it be beneficial? And that's something you have to think of um, when you're doing these things. And restorative practice too. And I want to say this too. I mean, it's not just intervention. It's a mind shift and a behavior shift as well. And so, again, the biggest thing is being able to separate the deed from the doer. Just because a person made a poor choice doesn't mean um, that this individual is a bad person. And so, be able to separate the deed from the doer and really understand to resolve um, the harm that was done with the individual relationship, not necessarily um, um, punishing the kid. I mean, like just setting consequences because they broke an infraction. We really want to take this time, restorative practices, more building the skills and providing the kid with the support to uh, strengthen and maintain, or even create a relationship within the whole school. Because so often people um, want to focus on the tier 3 individual restorative practice, the justice piece, bringing two parties together. Like it's and I always push back. You have to focus on the whole continuum because you cannot repair a relationship that didn't resist from the beginning. And so therefore, I mean, uh, the justice piece will be ineffective because if you don't do the proactive and preventive piece of building relationship with all students, with students, the teacher, with the school and the community, when you have to talk about repairing conflicts, you can't repair something that a relationship that wasn't there from the beginning, or just as you can use restorative practice to create and strengthen that relationship. And we all know with John Hattie work, I mean, with visual learning, like student and teacher relationship have a very high effect size when it comes to learning. So yeah, ideally it's a collaborative approach with like the student support team and the special education team to provide that training for using restorative practice with student with disability. Sorry for the rant, but I think I just want to provide that context to the question.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Summer has a comment.
Hey, is my microphone on? I just wanted to say that I really appreciated this way of thinking, along with what we were talking about in our last meeting. We talked about trauma-informed care, I guess 2 meetings ago now, because we had that one shorter one. But the thing that I want us to be mindful of as we discuss this is really like all of these wonderful programs that are being implemented in the school districts, thinking about how are we helping our students with disabilities, especially those with maybe more complex disabilities that are often in different locations, providing more individualized instruction versus instruction within the whole general curriculum. Like those students, how are they being considered and accessing the instruction? Because I think, like what you said, it's a whole system of learning, social emotional learning, and not just a response to a behavior challenge or an issue. And I think, like, as we think about our recommendations, it's important to think about how everyone's going to access these behavior supports so that everyone has a benefit from it.
Thanks. That's a good point. Anyone else have comments or questions?
If there aren't any, Karen, Kathy Davis and Michelle Kordakovsky are available to respond to the questions we received about the next presentation, crisis response activities.
Okay. Okay.
So,
thanks to Corby and Kong for coming today and also for doing your presentations. They were very helpful. Appreciate that. And I'm going to turn some time now to Kathy and Michelle.
just quickly, Mallory asked, do you have recommendations on finding out more information on restorative practices? So they can go to our website, right, Corby?
Yes, or I can set up an individual meeting with her, and I can kind of discuss and support her in the area that she is in, the schools that she worked with. So either or.
Great, thank you, Corby. Thank you so much, Kuhn. And thank you for putting that presentation online. It was really helpful for us to be able to watch it during the week.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just cut and pasted the questions we got for Kathy and Michelle into the chat. Okay, Michelle, we can see your screen. Well, we could. Oh, there you go.
Okay. This is
Did you want to start out with this, or do you want me to just cover the first question?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to have this virtual opportunity with you. The first we had was, does crisis response only refer to suicide? So Michelle shared the screen that we sent off to you in our presentation, and this is from one of our districts. In just 1 year alone, they had all of these different types of crises and critical incidents. And so it really behooves, I think, all of us to be prepared to deal with just about anything. And how many of us were prepared for a pandemic, for instance? How many of us even thought we would have to do that in our careers? And then the next question was Project Aware. Did you want to talk about that, Michelle?
Sure. So Project Aware, AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness and Resilience in Education, is a 5-year grant awarded to USBE by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. This was awarded in October of 2018, so we are in year 2 now, and the grant aims to increase awareness of mental health issues among children in school and provide training for school personnel, families, and community members. The project also connects youth and families with behavioral health services, and right now this is being piloted in 3 LEAs, one in Cache, Jordan, as well as Alpine school districts.
Thank you. So I posted the other 3 questions that we got as well now. Questions on secondary trauma information. So the first one is there any evidence supporting a reduction of secondary trauma with the use of behavior units or classrooms?
Okay.
The ones I sent this morning, Kathy.
Oh, right. I'm just now looking at this. I'm so proud of myself and my ability to use all this technology. So, anyway, you know, I haven't had a lot of experience in this domain. I think first and foremost, I think it's so crucial that anytime you're doing a crisis response, you do not want to create secondary trauma. So if you look at the screen that Michelle's projected for us, this is the circles of vulnerability. And I think this is something that we always have to keep in mind with the students that we're dealing with. There's 3 areas of proximity to the situation. And so secondary trauma can be created depending on where that child is located with regards to the trauma, if you will. So for instance, if that child was like an eyewitness or had physical distance from the location of the incidents, or if that child had been a victim of bullying, they don't necessarily have to know the person that has died. If they're a victim of bullying or the classmates perceive that they are like the deceased, and also if they had some kind of involvement in the social circle, or if they currently have a mental disorder or a history of trauma. So this is something that I'm going to research further and get back to you on that. I think that the thing that would be the best use of your time in a crisis response is working with that child individually on de-escalation procedures and also emotional regulation, because I think that's a skill that needs to be taught to just about everybody, is how do I regulate my emotions in times of uncertainty? And then the second question is there a likelihood secondary trauma is experienced by school staff increase with behavior units? And I would absolutely say yes, because I think that one thing that I have learned as I've been doing crisis response over the last 5 years is secondary trauma affects the crisis responders more than anyone else. And they have to be really cognizant of
how this particular trauma or crisis response has affected them. And one key part of crisis response is the debriefing procedure that you do after the crisis. And I always urge people that are really close to a crisis to get help for themselves, whether that's through their employee assistance program or individual counseling, but debriefing is such a crucial part of that.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that in regards to like the professionals, the teachers, paraprofessionals, school staff? Does that debriefing for a crisis typically come from the crisis response team, or are administrators prepared to, or this, now that we have school counselors, professionals that have maybe a little bit more background in that, are they trained to help provide that support to their school staff in crisis times, and also thinking about like perpetuating states of crisis, which some of our classrooms are kind of in that. They have undertrained teachers hired as associate teachers that don't have the training or background to deal with the challenges that they have, which increases the secondary trauma response, right? And the incidence of behavior. Is there supports in from the state office to administrators to help them through that?
Summer, thank you so much for this question. I think it's really vital. So one thing that we've had to do over the years is increase our capacity to meet the crisis response needs throughout the state. And one thing that I networked with the Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health and the crisis response teams. Let me give you a case scenario, case in point. I've had several scenarios where I've had to activate the mobile crisis outreach team to help provide additional crisis support and debriefing for not only a counseling staff, but maybe perhaps a classroom teacher or someone that was involved in the crisis. And so this slide that Michelle has put up for us is some of the things that we are encouraging statewide to buffer our schools and protect against the effects of crisis. So in addition to school climate and connectedness, really teaching the kids social and emotional learning skills, resiliency, but I would emphasize more than anything else, being collaborative with your external agencies. This is one thing that I'm so encouraged by what we have in terms of our ability to work with external agencies to help us with supports like school-based mental health and working with your administrators and those types of things. I hope I answered your question. This is an additional slide of just some key steps that you can use to reduce your suicide risk amongst your students.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Michelle. Also, they sent me a handout to share with you all that I can send afterwards. So
let's see. Was there another question in the chat? I'm trying to see.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one from Amy, actually.
Oh, there it is. It says, often I see it at the individual level in the school, guidance counselors back away from providing ongoing services if they don't see behaviors that interrupt the classroom. How do we change that mindset to really looking at the full student and the trauma they have gone through?
Did I unmute myself? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So that's an excellent question. I was a regular ed teacher, but actively involved in a lot of the IEP processes for my students. And I think what really needs to happen is just a school climate change that everyone within the school is there to make sure that every student is safe. And I think it's just a school climate issue. And I think that's just something that happens with time and with education. And one thing that we've done many times with school counselors and training them, especially as they come into new positions, is this collaborative approach to making all students feel safe and successful. So we've done a lot of school-wide prepare training that's from the National Association of School Psychologists. And this resource that we developed with Michelle and her Project Aware team is some things that are be really helpful for all of you, and just empowering your parents to know how to deal with their students and get them to be more successful. So we have guidelines for family and caregivers. So Leah, this isn't posted on the website yet. We have a help ticket to do that, but if you would like to distribute that, you're more than welcome to.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for that great information. This looks really helpful.
Thank you for that presentation. I just want you all to know that Kathy learned a whole bunch of new skills in putting together the presentation and getting it online and to YouTube. And it was fun to have back and forth with her about her learning as she did that. So thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Looks like we got one more question from Tiffany Bryant, it looks like.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, Kathy. I am, I guess, kind of new to all of everything that goes on with the Board of Education. I'm newer on this panel. And so I had a question for you on how is this information really getting out to families that are in crisis? Like, my biggest concern is that huge disconnect between the schools and the LEAs that maybe get this information, but when a trauma happens in a home, how is that happening that the schools are being informed of this kind of trauma and how to help in the actual home or help that student and that individual and those families? Where does that come down the pipeline?
Okay, that's an excellent question, Tiffany. And in these uncertain conditions where everybody is feeling so out of control, I think the first and foremost thing that we want to do to deal with that uncertainty is to give parents more control of their situation. I've had to do a lot of technical assistance during this pandemic, during this quarantine, in multiple suicides and accidental deaths. And so we've had to work collectively as interagency teams to get resources out to parents and families so that they're able to access telehealth in these situations. One thing you have to understand is during these circumstances, there isn't the usual methods of grieving, such as being able to have a funeral, or even a graveside service. And so we have had to collaborate with multiple agencies, and I've worked with district counseling specialists, and that's how this actual document came to be, is through those conversations. But I think what's first and foremost is you have these parents that are now having to be their students' teachers, and they're under a lot of economic stress. They may have lost a job and all of that. So it's really an all-encompassing approach to how to best support those families. If there's food insecurity, that may be part of it. And just being able to get a hold of all of our students has been really a struggle for many of the folks that I've worked with. So we just do the best we can to embrace the families in their grief and meet them. And then I've done a lot of one-on-one support with the crisis responders, because they can't necessarily do crisis response in the way that they would like to be able to see the student one-on-one.
So sorry, then secondary maybe on that question. So how is that happening in this time right now? I mean, just in my area, I know some very specific crises that have happened that have been televised or, over the news is how I hear about them because we are not socially connected like we used to be. I'm just concerned about my community and my neighborhood in these situations. Like, are the schools reaching out? Are districts reaching out to these families? Because it's not necessarily an incident that happened in the school, but yet if they were attending school, they would be getting these services or be able to get some of these things happening.
Right. So to answer your question, Tiffany, outreach is being done on the state level, the district level, and also the school level. And so as we become aware of these situations, we do outreach to the families directly and contact them and see how they want us to best support them. And so we are doing the best that we can to provide the support while also being really cognizant of our social distancing or physical distancing and all of the guidelines from the health department.
And if I can just interject, I can only speak to my Project Aware LEAs. So again, I mentioned that's Cash, Alpine, and Jordan, but I do know that they are doing, their family resource facilitators are doing active outreaches, either calling students just to check in with them. I know a lot of their counseling teams are following up with students that they were seeing prior to the pandemic. And I do know that a few of them have actually gone out to homes to do some interventions. So that is happening as well.
And let me just comment on one crisis that I had to help support and respond to. It was a situation at a school that had, was a Title I school. So a lot of their students did not have internet access. So they did do a lot of calls and home visits using social distancing guidelines. And so we've really had to adapt to the changes to give the support that we're able to.
Okay, it looks like Michelle Sanchez has a question.
I just was curious because I work for JJS and like they've recently done a trauma app for staff to where they can go in and do a small assessment to kind of check with them, especially just when you've had to respond to a crisis. And then it has resources as well. And I found like it's also, we debrief as well after a crisis, but it also just helps kind of start that conversation that it is happening, what you can use, what's worked for other people. And if the schools have that available as well, just it kind of helps start that conversation. Easy access.
I appreciate all that you say to that. And it's, I think, so crucial that kids get the skills, especially at this time. I worry so much about the mental health of all of our students and our educators, administrators at this time. One thing I think is really important is that you understand what trauma looks like and being able to watch for those signs and watch for signs of distress in children, how to deal with that and cope with that. So we've really pushed out a lot of resources for self-care. And I think especially in this time, it's important to take care of ourselves, whatever that looks like. And I appreciate all that Leah said about me, being proud of my accomplishments for technology. I mean, just grade yourself on the curve because we're doing the best that we can. And we really need to be there for one another, especially during these hard times.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat. We have a comment that says, I'm concerned about ongoing trauma for staff that can't access services. I think it makes it really hard to keep good behavior checks, etc. You're muted, Kathy.
I'm just trying to read all of this because I'm also seeing in the chat that someone said something about our rural districts. That's one thing that we've really tried to do is increase access to care, and whatever that looks like, whether it's telehealth and being able to access services for our students that do have Medicaid and making sure that that's paid for and so on and so forth. So we are working in conjunction with Intermountain Healthcare and other agencies to make sure that community outreach is available for everybody. And so once again, I think at this time, the default strategy is making sure that you take good care of yourself and take good care of your teams. Make sure that you check in with everybody that's on your team, see how they're doing, have kind of like a check-in with them.
Are staff being trained to identify or be aware of their needs?
So this is one of the trainings that Michelle and I and Andrea Hood of DeSama have developed. So one thing that I do in all of my trainings is make sure that that's part of the training is, especially when you're doing a crisis response, is always do the follow-up to make sure that that is a big part of it. So that's why we incorporated the guidelines for family and caregivers about how you need to pay attention to your stress, finding ways to frame your thinking, and all of those things, and creating safety for yourself.
So can you see Kat's question, or staff being trained? So I want to add to what you just said. So in our building, Kathy and Michelle and the rest of the prevention and the safe and healthy schools team are doing a great job sharing information. And I have heard across the state, other districts and even charter schools are doing that as well. But I would not be able to share information about like the percentage or number. I only know about anecdotes, and Kathy's nodding that she only knows about anecdotes as well. So they do create their own plans. Many of them create them in collaboration with us. Many of them invite us to participate to help with that. And we can provide models. We can go sit with them. Kathy sits with lots of LEAs. Corby sits with lots of LEAs to help them through that process. But many of them do it themselves. We have borrowed model plans from school districts that have done a really good job internally. And when we've reviewed their plans, we've seen that they're really good plans, and we've borrowed them to share with other districts and charter schools because they've done a good job internally. So, and the Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health collaborates with us. The Department of Health collaborates with us, but I can't say, you know, like a percentage or number.
And thank you so much for that, Leah. And I think anecdotally, I think this is something that's on everyone's mind, especially as we're gearing up for summer transition plans and gearing up for opening schools in the fall. So I know that Michelle and I and our team has worked on a campaign called Never Worry Alone. I'm kind of the old school and Michelle is the new cool. And so collectively, we work together so that we realize that we don't need to worry alone with this situation, that we all can work collectively together to have healthy solutions. So we will be rolling that campaign out to help support people as they transition into this new normal that we're seeing.
Thank you. Appreciate your time and your presentations and all your answering our questions. Okay, so our next
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks. So, Leah, on the agenda, there wasn't a place to renew or to approve the minutes. Do we need to do that?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that really quick. So Brian sent out the minutes. Does anybody have any changes or edits or anything on there?
So Karen, do you want to tell everyone about the 3 edits you already asked Brian to make?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Where did I put that? Okay, I had a couple of grammatical things, and also
we added Katie as present because she didn't end up on the list, and we added Christina as excused.
Right. And let's see. Then baby watchers to baby watches, right?
Sorry, I was going off the auto-generated subtitles in those ones.
Yeah, and I think that was it. Others were just grammatical things. Was there something else on that, Leah?
Nope, it was just those 2.
Okay.
Additions, Katie and Christina.
Okay. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Christina. I motion.
Okay, Christina, a second.
This is Emma. I second.
Okay, so Christina and Emma, thank you. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good job. Okay, so our last 2 things on our agenda, our discussion of crisis management, and that is, Leah, that's to get ideas for our memo to the board. Is that right?
That's correct. If you like recommendations to the board related to crisis response, related to anything we've talked about, yes.
Okay, and then we had some housekeeping stuff and talking about a subcommittee. So when we've got about 20 minutes.
Did we also need to have a vote for to elect a new chair elect?
Yeah, that was part of the housekeeping, talking about scheduling meetings and the chair elect. So how do we want to do that first and then talk about the memo and the subcommittee, or what?
I have another appointment at 11:30 that so my time will end then, and it would be good for me to know who's voted as the chair elect if we want to do that.
Let's do that, and then the talk about the subcommittee, because that was something that you felt strongly about. Okay, do we have anyone that would like to volunteer or nominate someone for the chair elect for this coming year? They would be the chair elect and work with Summer next year to do the memos and those kind of things, and then the year after that they would be the chairman. If anyone want to volunteer or be nominated? Okay, Stephen. Mallory nominates Stephen. Hey, Stephen, do you accept that nomination?
I just have a question about time commitment on that because I just started my master's in special education. What's the time commitment on that as far as how many hours?
It's attending the meetings and then maybe having a meeting or a phone call in between there talking about what the agenda, setting the agenda and things like that, and then working together on the memos with the chair and the vice chair. So would your schooling, that'll take more than 1 year, right? So that would go into your year as the chairman?
I don't think it'll take more than 1 year. I think I can get it done pretty quickly. So just because I already have a fair amount of experience, I don't think it'll take me very long to get through the program at all. Yeah, I'll accept.
Okay, great. Any other nominations? And we had to see that Michelle seconded.
I was gonna say too, with the memos, I probably spend maybe like it's overtime. So, but probably about 3 or 4 hours for each memo, which we try to do if we meet every other month. So it stays about an extra like 3 or 4 hours on top of what I've done for USEAP as just a member, being the co-chair is what it's been for me. So.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Summer's help this year on the memos. She is awesome at writing those and collecting your thoughts and things. I just really appreciate her for that. Okay, so should we vote? All in favor of Stephen for the vice chair for the coming year, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, great. Congratulations, Stephen.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we've talked about, or Summer brought up the fact that we've talked about meaningful inclusion, and we haven't gotten to that. It's kind of got pushed on the back burner. We talked about doing a subcommittee over the summer, and I'm guessing that would maybe involve a couple of meetings and people would pull together their thoughts on that. Is that what you were thinking, Summer? You're muted.
Yep, sorry, I muted myself, try to prevent background loops, but I was thinking if others on the committee who are interested, we could work on formulating that question a little bit better over the summer, mostly just back and forth through email if we find that we want to get together and talk about it before, but to have something for when we come and do our meeting in the fall, whether that's September or whenever we do it, but to have something more concrete to come together so that we can figure out how to include it within our priorities for the next year, because it's something that each year that I've been on the committee has come up as a priority, but hasn't really been addressed head on. So I just want to try to get a subgroup of people to really figure out how we're going to address it more precisely, and do that through email.
So it looks like Karen Lancaster, Jennifer Price, and Amy Nicholson would be interested in being on the subcommittee. Yeah, and I agree. Inclusion is a huge topic. So if we can narrow it down or define it better, what our specific concerns are about that, or our suggestions to work with that. And Steve Phelps is interested. And Kat is interested too. And Tiffany.
Hey, I will, you guys, if anybody else wants to keep putting their names in, I'll just write them down and then I'll send an email out to that subcommittee. And I'll have Brian send out who is in that subcommittee to everyone in case there's somebody who would like to be included that did not that I didn't get their name for. So.
Okay, she said, do we mean meaningful inclusion in the general ed classroom specifically, or in all school-wide activities, or both? I think that's both, right? Activities as well as gen ed classrooms.
We had identified that we were going to address the priority of meaningful inclusion within academic instruction or general education instruction, but really we want to, just as a subcommittee, figure out what do we want to address? How do we want to address? So really, both would be what I would say right now, Emma.
Okay. Let's see, subcommittee. Okay, make sure I do all this. I wanted to also acknowledge really quick Mallory Poole and Deanne Shields and Amanda Longwell for their service on the committee. This will be their last meeting, and just want to appreciate them and the knowledge and time and effort that they brought to the committee. Thank you so much for doing that. And again, I want to thank Summer for awesome job she's done. She's been such a support. I've had a really hard year this year, and she's stepped in and really done a great job with helping, especially with the memo. So thank you so much. Okay, and then so that leaves us with talking about our discussion of crisis management and what we want to include in a memo to the board. So what are people's feelings on that?
Karen,
Uh-huh.
one thing we might want to do for housekeeping before we get to that is, as far as our first meeting that we would usually
right.
schedule in September, would we want to do, would we want to do the training of new panel members? Like we did last year, would we want to do that again? Would we want to have the meeting virtually and do like we did today with presentations that are put on YouTube that people watch before? Or do we want to try to actually meet together? Just some feelings on the subject would probably help Summer and Stephen and I to do some planning. I don't know that we need a consensus, but just some feelings.
I felt like the online, the video presentations, that was really helpful. Then I could watch it in my own time and digest it and go back and review it and make notes and things like that. It was there to look at, and that was easier to digest than sometimes going and having the full day of everything. I think too, it helped with watching it. Then sometimes I've had questions that later were answered in the presentation. So it seemed like it was more of a, I know, a concise, efficient way to use that. And that might be something that we want to do next year. Would that be helpful, or is it easier to do it in person? We could also, or if people wanted to, maybe have shorter meetings next year. And I wondered too if it's possible to do kind of a hybrid, have some people there in person than others distance, if maybe they have a hard time getting there. Any thoughts on that?
I think front loading the videos was super helpful actually, because and it increases the meeting efficiency time because we can focus on our questions, and be able to digest it a little bit more. So I think that's very helpful. I don't see why a hybrid model for meetings wouldn't work, where we do have a location in person and people are traveling hours away, so.
I absolutely agree.
So it looks like most people agree. Is there anyone that absolutely disagrees? Because we can certainly work on that if everybody feels pretty good about it.
So this is Christina, and I don't disagree. I actually agree, but one of the concerns I want to make sure we address, if we do partial in person and partial online, it then becomes very difficult for the people online to hear if there's a full group meeting in person and having that audio. So that would be something to consider and make sure we address before we go to this hybrid.
That's true.
Very good point.
And this is Kat. I don't disagree. I'm one of the people that drive from Logan down to the meeting, and one of the values of it is having that discussion. So I think thinking about how to maybe use hybrid, but also have at least one in-person meeting. For those that can make it and are in a position to be there. Would make sense to me. I would want to come. That's just my take.
Yeah. I agree, Kat. One of the things I miss about the in-person meeting is having little conversations with people and making connections, like during lunch and things like that. It's nice. It's been hard this year to not have that. I've missed it.
Well, one thing we were thinking is having the presentations be pre-recorded. Once you determine your priorities, having presentations pre-recorded so that you could half-day meeting that was in person for people who wanted to come. And obviously, if someone couldn't drive, we could set them up on WebEx. But have just a half-day meeting for discussion. So the discussion could be almost all in person, but we would have to attend to Christina's concern about making sure that if people wanted to participate online, they had access to that. But that's another option. So it would mean less time away from your homes, your classrooms, that kind of thing. try it. So Stephen and Summer and I can do some problem solving and see what we can come up with.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we need to set a date for the beginning meeting, or will you look at your schedule and do that? And I guess maybe I'll meet with Summer and Steve on that.
Yeah, we'll work on that. We'll work on sending the dates out.
Okay. Okay. Is that all the housekeeping we need to take care of then?
I think so. That's everything on my list.
Okay. So, what are people's feelings on what would be beneficial to put in a memo to advise the state board then on this crisis management, prevention, intervention, and postvention?
I kind of want to go back to something that Leah addressed in the chat when Kathy Davis was talking, and someone had posted a link that said, you know, for teachers that are maybe having secondary trauma as a result of a crisis, here's an affordable mental health care link. I don't know if you guys were all following that. And then somebody chimed in, and I feel like this really merits some discussion because somebody else said, well, paras don't have insurance coverage. And I think that that's really important. It's funny, when I was reading that chat and listening to Kathy, I thought I kind of had an aha moment because prior to kind of moving into more of a literacy-based paraprofessional, I worked as a specialist. And as I look back at the 5 years that I spent doing that, there were a couple of times where one time some kids got in a fight. This is at the elementary level. Some kids got into a fight and one of them got, you know, hurt. And then another time, another kid was being too rough and a kid got hurt. So the children were fine. But it was super scary for me as the only responsible adult in the room that these children got physically injured in a general education PE class. And as I saw that chatting going on, I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't even, because I remember laying awake the night that one of the students had gotten hurt just because someone was goofing off and being too rough, and laying in bed thinking, oh my gosh, what if he has a traumatic brain injury? What if he has a concussion? What if he, you know, and not being able to sleep because I was so concerned about the well-being of that student. And that kind of continued with me for several days. And then this mother is reaching out to try and, because she's kept him home, he is still not feeling that great. And this mother's reaching out, can you please tell me exactly what happened? And then feeling completely terrified, like, oh my gosh, am I going to be held accountable for this student's injury? And not knowing what to do with that. And as I look back and I'm like, whoa, yeah, I was completely traumatized by that. And as the specialist there was absolutely no addressing like any of the mental health repercussions or anything like that by anyone. As a matter of fact, I feel like looking back on it, I was like, wow, I was put in a position I shouldn't have been in as a classified employee in an LEA. I was put in a position somebody should have stepped in, and I don't think anybody was really taking it as seriously as they should have. So I think if we need to talk about that, we need to talk about A, teachers being traumatized or secondarily traumatized, but B, the support staff at a school, same thing.
So Leah, if paras and aides aren't covered by insurance, would that be a slot that the school psychologist could help with? You know, when I was teaching school, I had a situation with one of my students, the very uncomfortable situation that I needed to address, and I worked with the school psychologist on that. But could they be there to help provide mental health for the staff as well as the students, or other things that come up?
Probably not, and not because they don't have the skill or ability, but because most school psychologists are paid with IDEA dollars, and that would likely not be an allowable expense. If a school psychologist or school counselor or school social work was paid with unrestricted funds, then that would likely be something that they could address. And certainly they could address it in an emergency, but no, not on an ongoing, type of situation.
Most school districts, I would think, have the employee assistance plan that provides short-term kinds of things. Would paraeducators or part-time staff have access to that, or is that only people that have insurance through the district?
I think it's just insurance, but to be honest, I can't speak to that. And also, to be honest, that all of the issues related to insurance and employment, those are outside the purview of the state board. And so the issues of ensuring that staff who work with students in crisis or students who bring trauma to class, or when traumatic events happen, those are issues that the state board has some purview over. But when it comes to, it's just it's a hard line, because employment is completely, anything related to employment, including benefits, is completely an LEA issue, and the state board has absolutely no purview. Even though they care deeply, they can't, they don't have any ability to, do it.
So access to mental health things would fall under the employment insurance kind of thing. There's not something else that could be done to give staff access to some help like that?
Right. So training would be would be within the purview of the state board. Training, information for staff, and then intervention for students. But intervention for employees would be outside of the purview. Training for employees is inside. Intervention is outside.
This is Christina. Can I offer a thought? So I have, I'm a certified trainer for CPI, so the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention. And one of the protocols we train our staff on is goes through a whole dynamic on the postvention, and it has two components. It's postvention for the individual who's in crisis, and then postvention for everyone else. And so potentially, could that be one of our recommendations to LEAs, is that they very strongly consider identifying postvention supports for the individual in crisis, and then again for those around them?
If you're asking me, Christina, I would say sure.
Would it be possible for districts to, I know that like Alpine has the Circle of Life counseling center that they've partnered with as far as getting discounts for teachers. Would it be possible to encourage districts or LEAs to negotiate with local mental health providers discounts for teachers or staff?
To be honest, I think the state board would see that as outside of their purview. I mean, you can recommend anything you want, right? But I don't, that would not be a recommendation that they would go, oh, let's look into that. Let's look at, because they see that as outside of their world and their job.
So training and awareness would be something more realistic. They would say that's something that they could provide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had asked the questions about restorative practices and secondary trauma, and how they really they go together, in that when you have restorative practices and it's that mind shift, then you're trying to help prevent the secondary trauma. But my concern is that one of the strategies that's often being used is to put students who are capable of bringing the secondary trauma to light in a classroom, putting them all in one classroom, and kind of well, the staff and the other students that are in there are being exposed to heightened levels. And so if we're looking at trying to be on the proactive side, is that really a model that's effective and conducive to being healthy for students? Or are we looking at the greatest good for the greatest number of people? So few people are exposed in a very small situation versus it might be 5 or 6 different classrooms and the general education setting being exposed to the potential of trauma. So I don't know that there's an answer. I just think it's something to think about, because a lot of times in rural settings, because we don't have the same access to resources for RBTs and BCBAs, and our district looks like we've got 3 or 4 people maybe that go around to 10 schools. And so we've got to find something that works systemically to help promote health and well-being and safety for not only the students, but the teachers and the students who are witnessing the trauma. So mine came from a little bit different point of view than specific to crisis outside of school or suicide. It was more directed to crises that happen inside the classroom, and oftentimes in the rural setting, because we're limited in resources. Kids are put into one classroom with one teacher and 3 paraprofessionals who are unqualified and may not have the supports that they need. So that's a piece I would like to address, and I don't know the answers, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Thanks, Amy. Anyone else?
One of the struggles I've seen with the movement towards restorative practices is it generally either happens at an all school level or it happens at an all district level. To do it at a classroom level would be something that, I think if we could open that up for teachers to say, hey, I would like to try it in my classroom, whether it be through some sort of USEO course or something like that, where teachers can kind of get together and say, hey, this is something I want to do in my classroom. The school may not be ready to do it entirely all in at that point in time, but a teacher specifically could get that training directly and try it inside of their classroom as an isolationist. So I think that would be very beneficial.
Thanks. Okay, Deanne says the Granite School District presentation talked about classroom management. I had a math person from NEBA District tell me this week that they're getting student teachers, at least in math, have had no classroom management instruction in their education program. This seems specific to one university, but classroom management is an important foundation to having an organized, safe class, good behavior support, and also reducing the stress and frustration of the teacher. So maybe addressing the pre-service teacher training in management and behavior supports and restorative practices. I agree. I know it seems like it happens more in secondary, but I know of several situations where the teacher may have been brilliant and really known their topic, but they didn't have the classroom management skills, and so not a lot happened in their classroom. So Deanne, what What would a recommendation for that be, to recommend that that before they become a teacher, they have classroom management training? Is that something we need to address with, that we suggest that they have that in place in the secondary or the higher education? Is that something the district would provide when they sign on to be a teacher?
Karen, I think it depends on the university. When I did my secondary education, that was a required component, classroom management, and also courses in behavior management. But I don't know if those come in and out of fashion, or if it's just depends on the area of focus. So I didn't ask her if they were seeing that problem with other student teachers or just the math ones, but it's become a big enough problem. They've been trying to talk with the university about getting something fixed on it, and the university hasn't seemed very willing, at least in the math department, to do that. And so what we're going to do is pull the student teachers out and move them around from classroom to classroom so they can actually watch effective classroom management instruction, because they don't have that background in it. So I think having that as pre-service, it's going to have to be followed up in the district, because as everyone's been saying, each system in each district or each school can be different, but there should be some basic classroom management, because the honest truth is, if you can't organize and manage your classroom, you're going to increase the risk of having behavior problems, having incidents, having the teacher unaware of what's going on from in one end of the group to the other, even to creating a situation that makes kids feel uncomfortable or that they can't learn in that environment. And so I think if you don't have a good strategy for that, and I think Granite had it in their tier 1, then you can throw all those other management things on top of it, or the emotional stuff on top of it. But if the classroom is not being managed properly, it's not going to be really effective. So
yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that.
I'm fairly certain that the classroom management is already in the requirements for any sort of pre-service. So I'm curious to see, because I have my math education degree. We had to take classroom management courses. Now, I don't feel they were adequate. That's the difference. They were more theoretical and not like actual in-classroom classroom management stuff. It was just all theory. So the only chance you had to apply it was your student teaching. So I'd be curious to know exactly what they're saying by they don't offer it. Is it they don't have it adequately, or they just don't do it at all? I'm pretty sure it's currently in the licensing requirements that every teacher must take those courses.
It is. It's in board rule.
Yeah, it almost sounded like when I talked to her, from her discussion that they had with the university, that at least the math teachers were not getting that instruction, because I agree it was a requirement for mine. And I was going to say, I think I got really good instruction, because I think they did it also, they followed through with it during student teaching. That was part of the things that they were stressing and looking at. But
is that the same even if they're doing that alternate route to licensure? Are they required to take classroom management?
Yes, ARL doesn't exactly exist anymore. Starting on July 1, it doesn't exist, but it's required in board rule. A program can't be approved without classroom management. So if you just want to let me know which university it is, I can check in with the program approval team and find out what's up with that program. But it's a required competency in board rule. A program can't be approved without it.
Okay, that's good to know.
I think this is Amy Hurst. I think it's highly affected by support at the administrative level, what level of behavior interventions they have, and the MTSS kind of that Granite showed us earlier what they're doing. I think it's highly affected by that, because a classroom teacher often can't do it alone, and having that culture in the school and the MTSS and everything is really key in those behavior supports. As well as what we're talking about, not discounting what we're talking about. As far as classroom management skills, that's really critical too.
Can I go back to the teacher well-being conversation we were having earlier? One of the things after Leah suggested trainings could be done, if the districts were to train, is we have a tendency to jump to the tier 3, tier 2 level. If district were to train employees about self-care, at the very first tier 1 level, like how do you take care of yourself in these, that would be highly beneficial, I think, to teacher retention and also sort of avoiding some of those longer term situations that go on. So that's a recommendation we can definitely make. Because self-care for teachers is, I think, vital at this point in time.
Thanks. Okay, and I'm taking notes, and I'm copying parts of the chat as well. So thanks for your conversation there.
Karen, I have a comment. This is Mallory. As representing teachers on the panel, I feel that it's important that I speak up during this time. I know a lot of us serve as dual roles, having parents, your parents and teachers. But as being a teacher, I wanted to just voice my comment about this, that crisis is happening everywhere. And thank you, Leah, for clarifying that training is required, a part of programs. I think following up on that program and making sure programs are doing what they say they're doing is a huge part of importance. But also, I asked for Corby's information and took down Kathy's information because as a teacher, we receive so much training and we have so many expectations placed upon us that at times, at least in special education, when they have these whole school approaches to behavior or things, special ed can be overlooked. And I think that it's important to have these resources. I liked how it said that we can visit the USBE website for more information on restorative practices, and then how Kathy sent us her PowerPoint. I guess what I'm trying to say is crisis is happening and special education teachers are trying their best to be prepared, but there needs to be more. And I agree with everybody who's saying there needs to be more. And my suggestion for more would be follow up on what needs to be or what's already required is what I would recommend the board, or we recommend to the board, but also provide ongoing training, whether it's online programs or there was a trauma-informed practice that as a teacher I could take, but it was optional. So I was just making these resources available to teachers and then publicizing it because a lot's out there, a lot's placed upon us, but we need to make it available. It's not always available, even though people think it is.
Thanks. Okay, let's see. So are you saying, Mallory, to make it them required or just publicize them more so people know that that's a resource there that they can take advantage of?
I think publicize more and emphasize it, just like Emma was saying. It's happening rural, it's happening urban, emphasizing it across the state, and maybe one of the focuses can be, I know right now during this specific COVID time, one of the priorities is mental health should be important, but
yeah,
having that be a priority continuously throughout education, I think would be a good suggestion.
And publicizing it and talking about it all the time, not just we're mentioning it once and we're assuming that you're just going to remember that forever. And yeah, okay, that's great. Let's see. Okay, anything else?
One last thing, just something to consider is the difference between some students, the behaviors that they express or they exhibit that induce trauma are oftentimes a function of their disability. It's directly related. And so that's a very different awareness that I think needs to be brought to the forefront for teachers, staff, that there really is a difference between behavior because of environmental situations and anxiety and those pieces, and then that direct link to it's a function of their disability. And that doesn't mean that it's okay or that it's acceptable, but I don't think there's a clear enough understanding that there is a difference.
Okay. Okay. If any of you think of any other input that you'd like to have in that memo or any other thoughts on that, please email me and or Summer, and we will work on putting that in the memo.
Karen, can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
I just think that these things that we've been talking about today are so huge and are so important for our students and for our staff and for our whole community and all around. I almost feel like we're skimming over some really, really important topics and some things as we are trying to grasp all of it, and are wondering how everybody would feel about even, you know, potentially, and this might be a motion for next year's agenda, but potentially really digging into some of this stuff and making some really specific recommendations. I just still feel like we're so broad. I think we're all kind of on the same page that this is all really super important information, and it's really important to get out to people. But I'm almost worried that we're bypassing some of that importance and skimming over it really quickly.
Is there something else that we could put in the memo that would address that?
I think that's the problem. I feel like this is like weeks and months of discussion, more than just an hour of discussion, before I feel like we can give a real good recommendation. I mean, I think that there's some really important things. I think that our panel here has a lot of good information and could come up with some really great recommendations for the board, but I don't know. Am I the only one maybe feeling this way? I just feel like I still have so much more I would love to add into this, but then also, like, it's so broad. I almost feel like if we could narrow down just one specific section and start on that, and then maybe another section and another section as we're making these recommendations, if that would be more beneficial than trying to write a memo or make a recommendation that's so broad.
I think I have felt that way with a lot of the other memos that we've written. There's so much, but I think it's good to have some specific things in there that the board can say, oh, that, like the wellness rooms in the last one, or specific things. Okay, here's some, and it's not going to solve all the problems. It's not going to address the whole big picture, but it will make some progress, and they can become more familiar with some of those things. And then if we, you know, come back again and say, okay, here's more recommendations, they say, oh yeah, we're familiar with these already. We'll further what we've got, or we'll add to that. Does that make sense? Thanks. Okay, anyone else?
Sharon, this is Deanne. I just have a quick comment. I was just renewing my license, and you do a whole bunch of these little classes like the ethics, but the suicide one, because I was an inactive educator, I could not access that training because it's given through the district. So I guess another recommendation I would have is that somewhere there was a link to that training that somebody could do if they were an inactive educator or because someone like me, I'm in and out of the classroom. It would be great to have had access to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I renewed mine this last year, and I thought when I saw some of those ethics videos, they were so good, and they were kind of entertaining, and they were interesting. And I think there's a lot of things that could be done that way in just little snippets, especially for general ed teachers that working with special ed or suicide or whatever. I think that's a potential to do a lot of things there. Be used in a lot of ways.
This is Christine, and I definitely agree. And I'm just curious about our recommendations and kind of going off of what you were saying, Tiffany. I also feel like there's so much we want to cover, and an hour doesn't necessarily do it justice, but kind of looking forward and maybe really emphasizing this as another priority next year. But at that point, I mean, and maybe this is more a question for Leah, how feasible is it to make a recommendation that, and it might be a bigger question, but that we actually include a component into licensing and renewal, that every year there's a revisit to, just like the suicide prevention and the child abuse prevention, for behavior support for all those preventative practices.
Karen, do you want me to respond?
Yeah.
So that's certainly a recommendation you could make. The number of short little trainings, required trainings that have been added to the license renewal process has increased dramatically. I think we're at 4 now. And so the board has taken that recommendation from other stakeholders. At the same time, because we have, and because there are several of them required now, I don't know if they would be less interested in adding more. That's certainly a recommendation you could make. They have taken that recommendation previously. That's how we ended up with suicide prevention, and that's how we ended up with the ones we have.
Didn't we recommend that on another memo to have something required for people renewing about special ed and how legally they needed to have input on IEPs or something like that? It seems like that was one of our recommendations.
Yes, for all students that they have, or excuse me, for all teachers moving from associate to professional, that they have some training in special education, which has actually happened, and the training has been created, and it's very cursory. It's not really even special ed law. It talks about MTSS, it talks about child find. It's very cursory, but it happened, and it is now a requirement for individuals moving from an associate to a professional license.
Is that something we could get access to watch?
I don't actually know the answer to that question. I'd have to find out from licensing.
Okay. Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, I will work with Summer on this, and when we get the rough draft of the memo, we'll send that out for people to give suggestions and additions and things too. So thank you again so much for coming today. Was that everything, Leah?
Yep, I don't have anything else on my agenda. Thank you.
Okay, and I will be passing my gavel on to Summer. So her term starts what, July 1st. So I will pass the gavel on to her so she can be the chairman next year. And thanks again for all of you coming today and for your support and participation. Appreciate it. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, Emma makes a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Okay, Mallory seconds. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.